In this class, we're going to continue our study of classical grammar. We're going to be studying Chapter 4 on number. So let's get our notes prepared. The name of the course is Classical Grammar. Classical Grammar, and we're in Lesson 4. The topic of Lesson 4 is number. So to get started with this lesson, let's take a minute and review what we've covered so far. Quick review. In Lesson 1, we studied the alphabet, we studied the letters and the sounds of the English language. We learned about vowels and consonants, diphthongs, and so on. And then we learned about how letters or sounds are joined together to form syllables. Syllables are joined together to form words, and words are joined together to make sentences. In Lesson 2, we learned about the parts of speech. And we learned that there are 10 parts of speech in English. So you should study to make sure that you can know the names of the 10 parts of speech, have a good sense of the definition of each of the parts of speech, and that you can identify the parts of speech. When you look at a sentence, you should be able to look at a sentence and go word by word and tell what part of speech each word is. That's the goal, to be able to do that. Okay? So we learned about the parts of speech, and then in Lesson 3, we started studying the first part of speech. We started by studying the division of substantive nouns. And we learned about different divisions. We learned about proper nouns and common nouns. We learned about proper and common nouns. Let me just look back at that lesson real quick. We learned about abstract and concrete. Abstract and concrete nouns. And then we looked at collective nouns that refer to a multitude. So we studied the different kinds of substantive nouns, which are the first of the parts of speech. And remember that substantive nouns are names of substances. Substantive nouns are names of substances, names of things that can exist by themselves. Okay? Remember, nouns are just names, and there are different kinds of names, different kinds of nouns. Substantive nouns are nouns that can stand by themselves in speech. All right? So that's what we've studied so far. And then in this lesson, Lesson 4, in Lesson 4 here, we're going to study the number of nouns. The number of nouns. And by number we mean how the idea of singularity or singular and plural ideas are expressed in nouns. Okay? So Lesson 4 is on number and how we express number in English. So finish copying that little outline there. Lesson 1 was on the letters and their sounds. Lesson 2 was on the parts of speech. Lesson 3 was on the first part of speech, substantive nouns. We learned different kinds of substantive nouns. And then in this lesson, lesson 4, we're going to continue the study of substantive nouns. We're going to learn about another characteristic of nouns, which is number, and how number is expressed in English. All right? Let's take a look at the lesson here. Lesson 4, number and the formation of the plural. It's on page 24 of our lesson document. We read, "It would soon be found convenient, though not necessary." Convenient, but not necessary. Convenient means it's helpful for us, but it's not necessary. Air conditioning, for example, is convenient. It's not necessary for life, but it's convenient. It makes life more pleasant. It would be found convenient, though not necessary, to indicate by an alteration in the form of a substantive whether one was spoken of or more than one. It would be convenient for us to indicate by changing the form of a substantive noun whether the noun was used to name one thing or more than one thing. So to express number in the form of a noun. It would be possible to invent forms to indicate many particulars with respect to number, but such forms would probably be very clumsy and unmanageable. So if we had a different form for one dog, two dogs, three dogs, and every number had a different form for the noun, that'd be ridiculous, right? We don't need to express every different number with a different form. That would be ridiculous. It would be possible, we could do it, but it would be clumsy and unmanageable, the textbook says. The end is more simply and more conveniently attained by the addition of a numeral adjective. So if we want to say 7 dogs, instead of having a form of the word dogs that represents 7, we just say 7 dogs. It's easier, it's better to just use an adjective, 7, and say 7 dogs, right? Than if you had to learn a form for every number. That'd just be a waste of time. Be clumsy and unmanageable. And remember, marking the number is not even necessary. We said it's just convenient, right? It's just helpful. It's not necessary. So if we had a system to show number that was actually a pain in the neck, it would defeat the whole point because it was supposed to be convenient, right? So it would be possible to invent forms that expressed all different numbers, but the forms would be clumsy and impossible to manage, and the end is more simply and conveniently attained by the addition of a numeral adjective to those forms of a noun which indicate that more than one are spoken of. So there's no need to have forms that show different numbers beyond some simple sign of whether a thing is singular or plural. An example of this in Greek, in Greek, there's actually 3 different numbers. There's singular and plural, and then there's a third number that's called dual, which shows 2 things. So they actually do have a different form to show 2. They have one form to show 1, one form to show 2, and another form to show more than 2. So Greek has that, but Latin doesn't have that, English doesn't have that. Of course, as I say that, the next paragraph talks about that. I didn't realize that. In some languages, such as in Hebrew and Greek, there is a form called the dual, which is used to indicate that 2 are spoken of. In English, as in Latin and many other languages, we have only 2 numbers. The singular number, which indicates that we are speaking of 1, and the plural, which indicates that we are speaking of more than 1. Okay, so When we talk about number, in nouns, in English, number in nouns, we have only two different numbers that are expressed in nouns. We have the singular, which shows that we're speaking of one thing, and we have the plural, which shows that we're speaking of more than one. If we want to speak of more than one, but we want to identify the specific number we're talking about, we don't have some special form of substantive nouns. We add an adjective. So we can see, if I say man, we can see that the noun man is singular. It speaks of just one man. If I say men, we change the form to express the idea of a plural. We show that we're talking about more than one, or naming more than one man. But if I want to be specific and say 3 men, what I do is I add an adjective. So 3 would be an adjective to the plural form, and that tells me a specific plural number. So we express a specific plural number by adding an adjective. So we have singular, we have plural in general, and if we want to be specific about how many we're speaking of, we use an adjective for that, a numeral adjective, any number. Pretty simple. All right? This is pretty simple. Now, the challenging thing about the plurals is that the plurals are formed differently. So we do have to learn the forms of different words, and for some words it's difficult. Okay? Some words it's difficult. You know, just like, you think of a simple example like mouse. How do I say plural? It uses a different form, right? The word really changes. It goes from mouse to mice. So you can see there's a little bit to learn. We have to learn how the plural is expressed, because sometimes it changes quite a bit. But the idea is simple. The forms, though, have to be learned. So we're going to go through that in this chapter. So it shouldn't be too much of a big deal. Let's go back to our text. So we learned that in English we have a singular number and a plural number, and the forms of substantive nouns change to show whether we're speaking of singular or plural. And remember also that this is not necessary for our language. This is something we do for convenience, just to make understanding the language easier. All right? To move on in the textbook, the plural number of a substantive is the substantive so altered or changed as to express that we are speaking of more than one. The plural number of a substantive. So a substantive, and make sure you understand, when I say substantive, I'm talking about a noun. A name has a singular and a plural form. When we talk about the plural, we mean the form of the substantive noun, the form of the noun that shows we're speaking about more than one thing. The plural of a substantive, this is Article 31. You see the numbers are on the right side of the page. The plural of a substantive is generally formed by adding s to the singular, that is, to the substantive itself. So first and most simply, we learn that the way that the plural is formed, and this is not complicated stuff, this is just simple grammar. But the problem with grammar, as we're going to see, there's a simple rule, and everybody says, no duh. We all know that. But the problem is the rule has lots of exceptions, and you don't necessarily know the exceptions, okay? So we're going to learn the rule, but our focus in this course is going to be on the exceptions, because those are the things that uneducated people don't know. They never learn the details of the language. So first of all, to express the plural number, the simple rule, the general rule, is to add s to the singular form. There's nothing mysterious about that. If I have a singular cat, the plural, we simply add an s, and we have cats. Singular tree is made plural by simply adding s. Trees. The form cat speaks of one, names one cat. The form cats names more than one cat. The name tree names one tree. The name trees names more than one trees. And you know what's interesting to think about is once you get used to this in your language, you hear that sound at the end of a word and immediately know it's plural. You know, we do it constantly every day. Even little toddlers and children can immediately identify the plural. We just get used to that sound, and it's immediately associated with the plural number. Just by adding a sound to a letter, to a word. Okay, so the simple rule is to add s. But our lesson in Article 32 says, but to this rule there are exceptions. To this rule there are exceptions. And we have a list of exceptions. And this is what I want us to focus on, because like I said, we learn this simple rule just, by speaking the language ourselves. That's not necessary from education. It's not necessary for us to go to school to learn that you add an s to a word to make it plural, right? Every 5-year-old kid knows that just by listening to his parents talk. What shows our education is when we understand all of the exceptions and the details, okay, the words that don't follow this rule. For us to know how to show their plural form, that's what really shows that we understand the grammar of the language. So what we want to pay attention to are these exceptions. So in Article 32 we read, there are exceptions to this rule. Exception A, the first one in our textbook there. Substantives that end in ch, sh, s, x, or o after a consonant, add es, not just s. Add es to the singular. So let's look at a few examples of words like that. So words that end in ch don't just add an s to make the plural, but they add es. And this is important because this is necessary for right spelling. So if we have a word that ends in ch, and we want to make the plural form of that word, we don't add an s. That's wrong. That's wrong spelling. We add es. So church becomes churches. And that's an exception to the rule because it's a noun that ends in ch. All right? That's what our exception teaches us. Substantives that end in ch add es to the singular. Next, substantives that end in sh, wish. We don't express the plural by simply adding s. That's not how we do it in English. We add es because es is added anytime the substantive ends in sh. We're told the same is true for s and x. So if we have fox, we don't make the plural by simply adding an s at the end of the word. That's not correct English. We add es. You may know that because you say it. You may know that because you say it already, because you've heard people say that your whole life. You may know it's churches. We don't say churchs, right? We say churches. You know we don't say wish, we say wishes. We don't say dish, we say dishes. And fox, you know it's foxes. You know that's the plural. So you may know that by hearing it and saying it, but we have to make sure we know it in writing. Okay? Any word, any noun that ends in s. So bus. Bus, to make the plural, we don't just add another s at the end. That's not right. That doesn't mean more than one bus. We add es. Any word that ends in ch, any word that ends in sh, any word that ends in s or x, and there's one more exception. Any noun that ends in o after a consonant. Any word that ends in o after a consonant. So in government, there's a word, a veto. A veto means a vote to go against something. Here we see the letter O, the vowel O, coming after a consonant at the end of a word, right? So if we wanted to write the plural form of veto, we wouldn't write vetoes. That's not right. Because this word ends in O after a consonant, we would add es. Vetoes. Okay? So those are the kinds of words that we add es to form the plural. That's the first exception to the rule. The rule is that you simply add s. The first exception is when nouns end in ch, sh, sx, or o after a consonant. For all of these, we add es to form the plural. Okay? That's the first exception to the rule. Let's look at the second exception to the rule. Many nouns that end in f or fe form the plural by adding ves. Many that end in f and fe form the plural by adding ves. What that actually means is that the f is turned to a v. The f is turned to a v, and then es is added. So we have a noun like leaf that ends in an f. If we want to express the plural, we don't simply add s. We don't say leafs. We also don't just write es. We don't say leafes. Right? And you see the problem. The reason why we make this change, make sure you jot this down. The reason for these rules is euphony. Remember we talked about euphony? Euphony is how our language sounds. And not only is euphony about how the language sounds, it's also about how easily the language is spoken. If you look at the word from the last exception, if we try to form the plural by just adding an s, look up here for a minute. If we try to form the plural by just adding an s, try to pronounce this word. Don't say churches. Try to just say it with just adding the S sound after the CH. It's hard. You see how it's actually hard to pronounce that word? That's why we make a change to the rule. These changes aren't random. You understand? It's hard to say that. And when I change it and I say, look, that's very clumsy. We need to add a syllable. Now say that. It's very easy to say churches, but it's hard to say churches. You have to add all of this effort at the end of the word. Churches is easy. So the reason why we have these exceptions, it's not just all random craziness. There are reasons that have to do with euphony, how the language sounds, how the language is pronounced. We make these changes in our language so that we can clearly pronounce these words. Otherwise the words would get sloppy and we wouldn't pronounce things clearly and the language would be harder to understand. So when we look at this example here, leaf. If you try to say this, it's hard. Say leafs. You see how you have to really add a lot of energy at the end of the word to get that S sound. Leafs. But what this rule teaches us is we don't say leafs, we don't say leafus, because even leafus is hard to pronounce. We can make this easier if we convert the F to a V. And then this E is actually silent. So we say leaf in the singular, and for the plural, we don't say leaves, we say leaves. Leaves. Okay? And the reason why we use a V with an S is because when we pronounce the S sound, the V sound is in our mouth. In our mouth, the V sound is close to the S sound. It's closer than the F sound. The F is full of air. The letter S, when we say the letter S, we use our voice. We say Z, Z. And so we change the F, which is full of air, to the V, which has voice, and it's closer to the sound of the S. Leaves. It's easy to say that. Okay? So that's why the rules and the exceptions are what they are. It's to help us pronounce words more easily, more clearly, and make the language sound more pleasant. So words that end in F show the plural not in this way, but in this way. By changing the F to V and adding ES. This is also true for words that end in FE, like knife. It's not correct to say knifes. The correct way to express the plural number is to change the F to a V. So the right plural form of knife is knives. Knives. And that E is silent. Knives. Okay? That's exception 2. Then our textbook says counter exceptions. Exceptions to the exceptions. Counter exception A, Article 33. Of those nouns that end in O after a consonant, there are some that don't follow this rule. Canto, tyro, quarto, and occasionally some others are written without an E. So we learn that O after a consonant is made plural by adding ES, but then we learn that there are some exceptions to that exception. And we're given a couple words, like canto. The exception taught us that we should say cantos with an ES. but that's actually not right for this word. This word is different, and we simply add the S. Cantos. Now the reason why these words don't follow the normal rule is because these words, like canto, is actually a word that's taken from another language. It's not really an English word. Canto means a song in Italian. So we can see this exception to the exception is because it's not actually an English word. And looking at the second counter-exception, a counter-exception, you understand, is an exception to the exception, right? When CH is pronounced hard, like K, S is added. So what that means, if we take a word like, you know what a loch is? A loch is a lake, all right? It's an older English name for lake, loch, like the Loch Ness Monster. You've heard of that? Lake Ness. It's Loch Ness. Because this word ends in CH, it ends in CH, but it's not pronounced like CH in church. It's pronounced hard like a K. The plural form is not made by adding ES. That's not right. If you try to pronounce it, it doesn't even make any sense. The plural form is made by simply adding S. So if the CH at the end of a word is pronounced hard, like K, then it doesn't follow that exception and add ES, it just adds S. You understand that? And there are some words that have O at the end of the word following a consonant, and they don't add ES, they just add S. So the general rule, remember, is we add S to the singular form to make the plural, and then there are some exceptions to that rule, but those exceptions don't apply to every single situation. There are also exceptions to the exceptions where those words actually do follow the rule, even though they have something in them that looks like one of the exceptions. Okay? Next, the next counter-exception, exception to the exceptions. Letter C at the top of page 25. Words that end in OOF, oof, words that end in IEF, and then you see there's an exception to the exception to the exception, right? Thief, this is not true of thief. Words that end in OOF, words that end in IEF, words that end in double F, except staff, words that end in RF, together with the words strife and fife, do not change the F into V. And you'll see that even these rules and even these exceptions aren't true. So it says, words that end in OOF do not change F into V. So if we took like the hoof of an animal, if we took the hoof of an animal, how would we form the plural? Have you ever heard the plural of hoof? How would you say? You would say hooves, right? That's what we say. But this rule in the book here says that that's actually not how you do it. So listen, before you write everything down crazy here, what I want you to see is that there's a general rule, right? The general rule is we add S to the singular form to make the plural. And then there are exceptions to this rule, which adds some craziness. And then there are exceptions to the exceptions, which add some more craziness. And then there are exceptions to the exceptions that when we look at them, we're like, that's not even correct because we do say hooves. We don't say hoofs, right? And so what I want you to see is that it's difficult to learn all of these different spellings and forms through some kind of easy, orderly grammar study. The English language is a mess. The English language is not an orderly, academic, intelligent language. The English language is a language that we learn by speaking. The rules are made by speaking, and then later on we try to figure out what the rules are after we've already learned to speak the language. And the spoken language doesn't necessarily follow any written rules. And so while the rules can help us to get most of the words right, you'll never be able to master English by studying simple rules. The only way for you to really learn all of this is by experience. Okay? By experience. If you hang out with uneducated people, if you watch, dopey TV shows or listen to dopey songs and things like that, you're going to hear ignorant people use the English language, and you're going to learn the language from them. But if you read the writings of intelligent English people, and you gain experience hearing the language from intelligent English people, masters of the English language, you'll hear how they express different ideas, and that's the best way to really master the English language, is to simply imitate the masters of the English language. Okay? So it would be nice if we could just learn a couple of rules and that'd be it. That would be sort of a fantasy world, but English really doesn't work like that. English is a messy language. It's why it's very hard to learn to read and spell English. It's hard. It takes experience. There are a lot of words where you'll have no explanation for why the word is spelled the way it's spelled. It doesn't follow any of the rules. That's just part of learning English. But if you're going to make an error, at least your error should be intelligent, right? That's how these rules can help us. If you're going to make an error, you can totally miss and just look ridiculous, right? Like hoof. You could say hoofus, and people will look at you like, what are you talking about? That's not even reasonable. If you make a mistake and say hoofs, people will ignore it. If you say hooves, that's what people usually hear. But if you go and say something like hoofus, that's the kind of error we want to avoid, right? Errors that are just crazy, that make us sound like we've never heard the language before. Okay? So it's messy, but we just want to avoid embarrassing mistakes. Okay? And you've probably had embarrassing mistakes like that, where you said something, you tried to pronounce a word that you've never heard before, and everyone laughs at you and says, where in the world did you hear that? And actually, you never heard that. That's the problem. I don't know how to pronounce this word. I'm just taking a guess. But the people who have heard the word think you sound ridiculous. Sometimes it's impossible to avoid that, right? Because English is a mess, like I said. So words that end in oof, words that end in eef, words that end in double F, words that end in RF, so think of dwarf, would be dwarves. But this says do not change F into V, which is opposite of what we actually do. So not sure where the author gets this idea from. And then lastly, letter D there on that page, several nouns have peculiar forms in the plural. Some words just change the form of the word. In some of these, the vowels of the word are changed. For example, in goose, the plural is geese. It's not gooses. We actually changed the whole word. Instead of gooses, it's geese. Foot, the plural is not foots, but feet. Tooth, the plural is not tooths, but teeth. In mouse and louse, the OU is changed into I, and the S in the word is changed into C. The plural of mouse is mice. The plural of louse is lice. Others form the plural by adding en at the end of the word. So for example, ox. The plural is not oxes. The plural is oxen. We add en at the end. The word child is singular. The plural is not childs. It's almost a completely different word. It's children. Okay, children. Sometimes the vowel at the end of the word will change. For example, man becomes men. The A turns into an E for the plural. Woman becomes women. The pronunciation of the word changes in both vowels. Die, sow, and penny have their own plural forms. Die, that means like, dice you use in a game. You call them dice, but that's actually the plural. That's the plural form. If you want to just refer to one of them, the word is die, D-I-E. So you wouldn't say, give me one dice. Dice is plural. You would say, give me one die, or give me the die. You wouldn't say, give me the dice if there was just one of them. So the point is there's lots of variation, and there are some rules to help us get most of the words right, but outside of that, you're just going to have to learn by paying attention. You're going to have to read good writers, you're going to have to pay attention when you hear intelligent people speak, and you're going to have to learn to imitate the way that they express different ideas, because some of the words simply don't follow the rules. That's how English works. Okay? Moving down to Article 35. Abstract substantives have no plural. So in our last lesson we learned about abstract substantives. Abstract substantives have no plural. And then there are exceptions. Let's go down to rule number 36. There are some words which have no singular form. We only use the word to refer to plural things. Ashes, bellows, bowels, lungs, scissors have no singular. I don't really know what he means by this rule, because we certainly do use a singular form for lungs. We say lung, right? If somebody has lung cancer, we don't say lungs cancer, so we do have a singular for lung. But the others are true. We don't have a singular form for scissors. Scissors is what we use to refer to one pair of scissors or three pair of scissors. We say scissors. Give me the scissors. We always use a plural form. Same is true of ashes. If we do refer to ash, we're referring to it as a material and not as actual ashes in a fireplace. So there are some words that have no singular form. Article 37, we start to really get into a bunch of I could say random words where it doesn't seem like there's a rule. And what I want you to see, look on page 26 of your book here. Page 26 in the document. This is Article 36. You see this long list. The whole page is a list of all strange words, strange nouns that make the plural in different ways. Do you see that? Can you pay attention to the lesson? You see the whole page is just a list of all strange words that are kind of exceptions that stand by themselves. And what you'll see in the first one, you see it says deer and sheep are both singular and plural. Deer and sheep. So if there's one in the field, you would say, look, a deer. Right? But if there were 5 in the field, you would say, look, deer. The form is the same for singular and plural. The same as for sheep. You have 1 sheep, you have 5 sheep. Singular and the plural is the same. The word fish is not so simple. And so what we have here is just a list of special exceptions. Okay? One of the ways that we know is because when we look at English writing, when we read, we find different forms. And since the master writers of the English language use different forms, that creates the rule. You understand that? The master writers actually make the rule by what they write. So sometimes the only way you can learn the rule is to see what the masters do. Just like we say in Latin. We're not trying to learn what makes sense to us. We're trying to learn what the Romans actually did. It's their language. The English language is our language. You could make up your own pronunciation, and as long as everybody starts to follow you, it's okay. We follow the masters of the language, usually the people who write the books, who write the things we read, and so on. Okay, so there's a big list of exceptions on page 26, and you need to read through those. It's kind of interesting, easy to study those things. They're just some random words that have unique characteristics. Then there's a section at the end here. It says, on the plural of proper names. On the plural of proper names. Usually a proper name doesn't have a plural form because it names one particular thing, right? Like Jacob is a proper name. There's not many times where you have to put that into the plural and talk to Jacobs, right? So the plural of proper names is kind of awkward. We really don't use it very much. But sometimes we have to, and when we have to learn how to express it. So sometimes proper names, because we don't use proper names in the plural numbers, sometimes it's hard to think about how the proper nouns should be expressed. And what this textbook actually teaches us is that even the master writers, they'll do it in different ways. So you'll read one writer and he'll express a proper name in the plural in one way, and you'll read another great writer and he'll express a proper name in a different way. So there's variation. The textbook reads, with respect to the plural of proper names, usage is still unsettled. That is, we see different uses in different writers. Some persons, if you wanted to say Miss Thompson, let's say that there were 3 girls, and they were all from the Thompson family, 3 unmarried girls, so you'd call each one of them Miss Thompson, right? How do you call all 3 of them at the same time? Or how do you speak about them all at the same time in the plural? Do you say the Miss Thompsons over there? Well, that's the question. We can find some examples in writing where the writer says the Miss Thompsons, the 3 Miss Thompsons. And we can find other examples in great writers where they say the 3 Mrs. Thompson, and that's how they express it. I think it's more comfortable for us to say Miss Thompsons, right, as plural. But you see that there's not necessarily a rule in English. The former mode, Miss Thompson's, is clearly more in keeping with the general practice of the language. And one's leaning at first would be toward that first example, but those who plume themselves on their accuracy adopt the latter. Sorry, I think I skipped a page here. Oh, yeah. At all events, they can allege the authority of Jonathan Swift, who's a famous English writer, who writes, I went to the lady's butler. So we find an example of, instead of saying lady butler and making the plural the lady butlers, he says ladies butler. So all this is teaching us is that we get these rules from the masters of the language. Do you understand that? When the master of the language expresses something in a certain way, because you may have to say something on a certain day, you may have to say something that really no one says. And you have to almost make up the expression. The great writers are often the ones who do that, and we simply imitate them because they know the rules, they know proper speaking and things like that, and so their best guess is usually the rule for everybody else. Okay? That's all. And then that brings us to the end of the lesson. So there's just a discussion of this confusing situation where we have to figure out how to express a proper name in the plural, because that's uncommon and may cause us some confusion. So that's all for Lesson 4. That's all the content of Lesson 4 for number and the formation of plural forms. So let's just quickly review. We learned that number is not necessary. It's something we do just because it's convenient for our language, right? Number is not necessary. It's convenient. It's not necessary because we have other ways to express number, like adjective nouns. We can say 1, 2. If I want to say singular, I could say 1 man. If I want to say plural, I could say 2 men, 3 men, 4 men, 1,000 men. I don't have to use different forms because I have adjectives. Okay? But it's convenient. It's convenient for the language, for our communication, to have a form that shows we're speaking of more than one. And if you just tried to practice the other method, you would see it gets annoying. And having a form for a plural noun is helpful. We saw that there are 2 numbers in English, the singular and the plural. And we saw that there is a basic rule, a basic general rule for the plural, which is that we just add s to the singular form. So if you were ever going to take a wild guess on a word that you had no idea how to make plural, a reasonable guess would be to add s to the end of the word. Don't get ahead of me yet in your notes. I know you think that that's clever, but you're not paying attention to what I'm saying. The general rule, if we're ever going to take a guess, the general rule is to add s, right? That's the general rule. What should guide us and sort of raise a red flag in our head is if we do that and realize it sounds clumsy. It doesn't sound nice. It's hard to pronounce. If it breaks rules of euphony, if it just doesn't sound good, it's probably wrong, right? If you say a word, it's just like spelling. One of the ways to test your spelling is if you write a word and look at that word and ask yourself, have I ever seen that word before? If you've never seen that word before, you probably spelled it incorrectly, right? That's a good way to check spelling. And you'll know when you spell something wrong because you look at it and you just think to yourself, that doesn't look right. I've never seen that word in a book, right? And then when you look it up, you find that you misspelled it. The same thing is true with speech. The same thing is true with speech. If you say something, you're going to realize, I've never heard anyone say that. It's probably wrong. You see what I mean? You'll just learn because what you say sort of sticks out. And you'll know that something doesn't seem right. Euphony is the rule. So there's a general rule for forming plurals. But if you say something or you're about to say something and you realize, no, I don't think that's what people say. I don't think that's how I've heard it said. That's when you need to check. You understand that? Okay? Like if you want to say there's 3 childs, and you think to yourself, I've never heard anyone say child's, right? You might not know the right thing to say, but you know that what you're about to say isn't the right thing. And so we need to just pay attention to our speech, pay attention to our writing. And if something doesn't seem right, we need to look into it. That's why you're always supposed to review your writing and read it out loud, to listen to it. Because you'll often catch errors when you try to read it out loud because it just doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like how your father would talk, or how your mother would talk, or how people you've heard talk on television and things like that. You'll just hear a difference. The sound will stand out to you. So, general rule, pay attention to euphony. Learn that there are a few exceptions to the rule that are common, that are worth learning. And then just always be careful. Be examining your speech and your writing, asking yourself if it sounds right. Pay attention when other people are speaking, when you're reading books and things like that. Pay attention to spellings and how different ideas are expressed, because that's how the English language works. Okay? That's all for Chapter 4 on the number of nouns. So to wrap up, take a minute, write a quick summary of our lesson, what we've studied. Make sure your name and date is at the top of your notes. Make sure you have the course name written. Make sure you have the lesson title written so you can file these notes and not be confused in a month when you look at it and can't figure out what it is. So that's all for Lesson 4 in Classical Grammar.